This is Logan Thomas, tight end for the Washington Commanders, and you're listening to the Bestball Fantasy Podcast.
Howdy, everyone. It's Bradley Stoller, and this is episode 29 of the Best Bell Fantasy Football Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Tonight, Dr. Edwin Porras joins us to discuss players who suffered injuries during the 2021 season, how they're recovering, and how fantasy managers should navigate those players based on best ball leagues and tournament settings. Edwin is a doctor of physical therapy and a medical analyst for FantasyPoints. Follow him on Twitter at FBInjuryDoc. Edwin, how's it going tonight?
It's going really well, man. I appreciate you having me on. These are always fun. I was telling you before we hit record that it's a nice little break in the day from actual work that I need to get done. Some people might call that procrastination. I call it nonlinear productivity.
Fair enough. I love that nonlinear productivity. That's right down my aisle here. So let's jump right in because let's not waste any time. Let's get into it. The number 2 running back off the board, Christian McCaffrey. He's been an avoid or fade for a lot of fantasy managers. Some are claiming that he's injury prone. I've seen him fall down to the 107 in some drafts. Is he injury prone? And if not, how much risk should managers include in their calculus of drafting Christian McCaffrey at the beginning of their drafts?
Yeah, so I don't think most NFL players are injury prone simply because there is a rate of less than 3% of NFL games actually being injury free. Once you account for the punters and the kickers and the offensive linemen who see stars but don't say anything to the athletic trainers, that number is probably closer to 0. The point is that everybody gets hurt. Everybody at some point in the NFL is injured. Running backs are really no different. Now, I did a really poor job of explaining this specific stat when I was on the PFF podcast, Fantasy Football Podcast with Ian Hartitz. I'm going to do my best to try to re-explain some of these data points that I was trying to explain to Ian, because I think that if you're against Christian McCaffrey as a player in fantasy football, you're more so against a running back in general. So if you look at the numbers, the data from 2016 through 2021, every top 12 fantasy wide receiver and every top 12 fantasy running back, this is on a points per game basis, right? So we're not doing cumulative totals. If you look at the top 12 running backs, they miss 0 games, so no time at all, right? They miss 0 games 33% of the time across that span. Wide receivers, top 12 wide receivers, miss 0 games 50% of the time. So the chances of a top 12 running back missing no time at all is obviously lower than it is for wide receivers. But once you look at the amount of times they miss 1 game, wide receivers and running backs are on par. 2 games, wide receivers and running backs are on par. Once you get into missed games of 3 and 4, running backs do take an upward tick. Why is that? Because they're more likely to have an MCL sprain, which is 4 to 5 weeks. They're more likely to have an AC sprain, which is 4 to 5 weeks. They're more likely to have a high ankle sprain, 4 to 5 weeks. So it's not so much that running backs are injured more often, although these numbers might indicate that. It's that running backs specifically are injured and have injuries that lay them out longer, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I say all of that to keep in mind that if you are not for drafting a running back as your first pick, I could understand that. The chances of them missing more games is higher. Circling back to Christian McCaffrey, as our buddy Pat Kerrane would say, he's got legendary running back 1 upside. The chances of Christian McCaffrey outscoring Jonathan Taylor are not, in my opinion, they're pretty high. And I think the only reason the CMC slips down to number 2 is because of injury history. Christian McCaffrey had an AC sprain in 2020. He had a high ankle sprain in 2020. Turned around and got a quad strain in 2020. Came back, played in 2021, had the hamstring strain, kind of par for the course. All 3 of those injuries that I just listed, all 3 of them in terms of the hamstring, the AC joint, and the high ankle are all 1, 2, and 3 the most likely injuries, the most common injuries among NFL running backs. So it makes no sense to me to fade Christian McCaffrey for having the most common NFL running back injuries. Does it make him more likely to have a hamstring strain in the future? It does. That's about a 5 to 15% re-injury rate, depending on the data that you're looking at. And the last ankle sprain he had was, again, the Saquon Barkley ankle sprain. Happens. That stuff happens. So the moral of the story is he's not necessarily any more likely to be injured than any other running back, at least to our knowledge. So for you to fade him to the 1.07, that's a long fall. And if you don't like Christian McCaffrey, I think what you're really saying, in my opinion, is you don't like a running back to be your top pick, which is fine. But don't pick individual players and say that the reason you don't like them is for their specific injury history.
I love it. And all of those injuries seem pretty independent of each other. You said they're common, but they also don't indicate, one part forces the other part of their body to take more to recover from. And he's only 26. It's not like he's 28, 29, coming off of bigger injuries, and he still can be used in the pass game. So I would agree with you. Christian McCaffrey, I've talked with a lot of different people in the industry, and they've said too, they don't understand why he's falling that far either. But with your casual players who have been burned, that's been what's been in their brains of, he's missed so many games, he's hurt me, how can I go back the well? So hopefully, Edwin, you've quelched the fears of our listeners and viewers. There is an older running back than Christian McCaffrey. He's 28 years old. Derrick Henry's coming off a foot fracture. Now, that's a different injury than some of the other injuries that Christian McCaffrey has suffered. It cost him 9 games in 2021. I think there were 5 screws in his foot. How should that injury and his subsequent recovery be a determining factor in how we approach Derrick Henry because of his age, because of his workload, because of maybe his recovery from that?
So it's really hard to make a connection between Derrick Henry and the foot injury, although it's not unreasonable. His body type, his body size, and the amount of carries that he's taking and putting that body through is very much unprecedented. We've never seen a dude built like Derrick Henry take the amount of punishment Derrick Henry's taken. So the chances of somebody like him getting a Jones fracture is probably higher than the chances of somebody like Tutu Atwell getting a Jones fracture. Very different bodies, different complex systems at work. So there's probably something to that. That's not to say that he's going to have another bone or joint related injury, but it's not out of the question. The other thing, I think the most concerning thing with Derrick Henry is that this might not necessarily be, Derrick Henry had a foot injury, now he's going to hit the cliff. This is more than likely just a sign that is coming. And let me explain what I mean by that. When you have running backs, the age cliff is a very, I think, misunderstood conversation that needs to have a little bit more nuance. When it comes to the age cliff, what is not necessarily an RB1 go down to RB50. You see an RB1 that drops to like the RB6, right? Or you see the RB6 that'll drop maybe to the RB13. This cliff that we like to call it as fantasy players is really more so what our perception of how far down they fall. They can these players can still be very productive NFL running backs and to a certain degree fantasy football contributors. The thing with Derrick Henry is that every year after year, his yards after contact, it gets worse. His forced tackles per touch gets worse. He doesn't get any older. He does have now the foot injury. And that's why I'm saying this might be more indicative of him slowing down than causative, if that makes sense. Yes. This might be more so just like it might be time to really stop giving him as many carries and touches as we need. It's not necessarily indicative of another injury, but as at his age and at his continuously stepwise decreasing efficiency, I don't think that he's the best bet and as a top 10 pick to deliver on what you want from him.
Yeah, Derrick Henry, as you mentioned, just massive volume. And if you think about it just from a pure volume standpoint, the likelihood of injury you mentioned is whatever it is. It might be static. It might be more related to the running back position. But when you give a running back 300 carries year after year or 28 carries a game, the likelihood that he gets injured on a random carry, it becomes higher that he misses time. And then over time, like you mentioned, some players just don't even report injuries. So Lord knows how many hits he's actually taken that he just gutted through and not told any trainers about. He's older than 28. So I agree. This concern about a running back age cliff, we saw that with like Todd Gurley with his knees. A couple of years ago, he was running back 1 and then running back 12, and then for the
Which
first
is
half,
very dramatic. That's like the most dramatic that you'll ever see.
But as the Todd Gurley lover and won me a few championships, it was so sad to see his precipitous fall. Nevertheless, Derrick Henry is very close to that spot, and I have like 0 of him going into this 2022 season. But we'll keep moving on. Travis Etienne, one of my favorite players. Dwayne McFarland of PFF put out how he's getting about 30% shares of Travis Etienne. I tweeted back at him saying I was getting anywhere from 20 to 30% in the leagues I was drafting in, but he's coming back from a Liz Frank injury, lighting up Jaguars camp. Can we safely assume he's fully recovered from that injury? And if he is, what is the chance of re-injury and how might that impact the Jaguars' usage of him this season?
Yeah, so I think we can safely assume that he's recovered from this Liz Frank. It's been almost a year, and by the time week 1 hits, it'll be more than a year. So I do think that he has been recovered, he's rehabbed, and there are some positives to look his way, right? Something that you have to consider oftentimes with these running backs is how much passes are they going to catch? And hopefully we think Etienne's going to catch them all, right? And you don't necessarily need to have any type of linear like explosion. You catch one pass for 2 yards and 1.2 points, right? That's the whole point. That's the whole cheat code behind the pass catching running back in fantasy football. So from that perspective, just from a volume perspective, I am not really concerned. I do think that he can be productive, and the passing game work could potentially mask any explosiveness that he may be lacking, because he doesn't come without concerns. The first concern is he probably still has some hardware in the foot. If he had a fracture, which we know he had some bone damage. So he might still have a pin in his foot or a screw in his foot or a couple of screws in his foot. And that can be bothersome. That obviously can be really bothersome for an NFL player. If you look at Marquise Brown, who had his screw taken out of the foot in 2020, I believe, after the 2019 season, or maybe I'm losing track of my seasons. Whatever season it was, I'm relatively certain that's true. He had the screw taken out, and there was a report on it. He's like, oh yeah, Marquise Brown played with a screw in his foot in all 2020. Yeah, of course he did, because that's what you need for a Liz Frank recovery. So NFL running back, and the point of me bringing that up is Marquise Brown was also on the injury report with foot/ankle. I think it was like 11 times. So it's not a non-issue. I'll put it that way. Okay. We also have data showing that coming back from a Liz Frank, NFL offensive players have about a 21% dip in production. So it's not that there are no concerns, and it's not that he comes with no risk. I will just say that I think there's enough volume and passing work there to mask it. Ultimately, I don't think that this is going to be Travis Etienne's upside RB1, number 1 overall type of season. I think he could be fine. I think he can be good. I think he can be a sneaky pick in the 3rd and 4th round. But I'm not necessarily banking on him as my anchor or my 0 RB, here RB, or anything like that. He's no Saquon Barkley. Hopefully we get to Saquon Barkley. But he's no Saquon Barkley, I'll put it that way.
Fair enough. The days of 5th round Travis Etienne are long gone. Now he's getting into the 3rd round of some of the drafts, and I don't know if I can pull the trigger there. But he's going as running back 17 right now, 41st overall on Underdog Fantasy. Let's move to Cam Akers. Akers made his way back to the Rams starting lineup just in time for the playoff run. Admittedly, he didn't look the same. For most running backs, we know Achilles injuries have been like their death sentence to their career. But we saw Donta Foreman come back last season and played admirably in Derrick Henry's absence. It took over 2 seasons for Donta Foreman to get back to that spot, though. Our fantasy managers taking a big gamble on Cam Akers at running back 18 in the 4th round, given his recovery and timeline from the Achilles last offseason?
I don't think they're taking a big risk at running back 18. I think that's really the bottom line for your specific question, the way that you framed it. They're not taking a big risk. Once you get to the point where you're in the 2nd, you're in the 3rd, and you've hopefully drafted one running back at least, I don't think Cam Akers is a risk. And I think we need to consider, or I'd like to explain the fact that an Achilles injury is not an ACL injury, in the sense that an ACL injury, once the quad and the hamstring are back online, the knee is held together by the new ACL. That's really it, bone to bone. When it comes to an Achilles tear, the muscle itself, the tendon that attaches your big calf muscles that are responsible for jumping, for cutting, for being explosive, for everything, are disrupted forever. It doesn't matter if you repair it or not. It's never the same. That is why the Achilles injury is so detrimental to NFL offensive players. So when you look at the fact that Cam Akers had the repair of the Achilles, you look at the fact that the data shows NFL running backs really fizzle out after this Achilles repair. That leaves us with an N of 1, a sample size of 1 of Cam Akers. There's never been a running back of Cam Akers, stature, of his draft capital, of his athleticism, of his leash from the front office, who have gone through an Achilles repair. You could frame that two different ways. And I feel like the tone of the way that you phrase it really determines what direction you're going to take it. So you could say there's never been a running back like Cam Akers who came back from an Achilles repair. There's no evidence of it. Or you could say there's never been an NFL running back who came back from an Achilles repair the stature of Cam Akers. It's totally in the tone of the voice that you say it. But I think what that goes to show is that we don't know. He's got a chance. He's probably legitimately got the best chance that we've ever had of an NFL running back to come back and be productive. But the bottom line is we don't know if it'll happen. I said in the beginning, before he made his comeback, when he first tore the Achilles, I said, I think Cam Akers can come back and be 85% of what we thought his ceiling could be. And I still stand by that. I wouldn't anticipate that he's going to come back and blow your doors off. I think people are still very excited about Cam Akers and the sort of residual excitement from the season that was taken from him and taken from us. I think it's a little unwarranted. You can be lukewarm on Cam Akers and it be okay. You don't have to be excited. You don't have to be down. I think you can just, oh, hey, look, I ended up with 15% share of Cam Akers. Cool. And that's okay. Like, not every player has to be polarizing. That's where I sit with Cam Akers.
The non-polarizing Cam Akers. I like it. He's attached to the LA Rams offense, which we know is going to be very good. They're going to be in scoring position. So if you're looking for touchdown upside, perhaps Cam Akers, especially if Darrell Henderson is not recovered himself. He struggles with ankle injuries from time to time. We'll move in a listener question. And next on the show sheet, J.K. Dobbins. Should we be worried? Do we expect Dobbins to start the season on the pup? He's only been on the sidelines from the reports we understand, catching balls out of the jug machine. He's only going a couple spots after Cam Akers at running back 21 in round 6. Do we have enough information to justify this, or is this a more risky pick than Akers?
I think this is a more risky pick than Akers. Unfortunately, you have to start from the beginning. The injury looked violent. It was a significant injury. We have reports that it was a multi-ligament injury, especially if there was PCL involvement. That's going to slow down his rehab to begin with. If there's meniscus involvement, that's going to slow it down even more. It's something that we really have to keep our eye on. He was only catching balls out of the jugs machine at minicamp. Not great to see. You'd like to already see him running. And honestly, I'd have to do the math. I think he's 7 or 8 months at that point. You would like to see him at least doing some straight line running, taking some carries, something. We see none of that. The reports aren't good. When you see that he is potentially a candidate for the pup or the reserve pup, not good either. This was a severe injury. Whether it's right or not, when teams have a running back coming off a severe injury, they tend to split carries. They tend to, really protect that individual, especially a guy with high draft capital. I don't think this is a year to draft J.K. Dobbins, and I think it's probably time to fade him, which is in contrast to what I said a couple weeks ago before all these reports came out.
His buddy in the backfield, though, Gus Edwards, also tore his ACL preseason. I can't remember if it was a week before or a week after Akers or after Dobbins. He's going so much later than J.K. Dobbins, and I haven't heard much reporting on Gus Edwards either, so I don't know if you had heard anything, but yeah, Gus Edwards, he's going much later than J.K. Dobbins.
Yeah, I have to be 100% transparent. And it probably is irresponsible of me as an injury analyst. Guys like Gus Edwards, I don't really look that hard for information on. I know that he'll probably be back before Dobbins. I know that he had an ACL tear around the same time. And I know that he's a big bruising back who, if you need 5 yards, probably get you 5.1 yards. He's probably going to get some goal line work. He's probably going to be the in-between the tackles guy. And he may start weeks 1 through 4 or weeks 1 through 6, whatever it is, depending on what happens with Dobbins. But yeah, don't get that excited about Gus Edwards either. For all the reasons you don't get excited for a guy year 1 post-op ACL, Edwards he's just a guy. And I mean that in the most respectful way. He is a good professional NFL football player. For in terms of fantasy upside, like, sure, maybe you get some touchdown luck, right, with him this year, but I haven't heard any reports. I'm not really looking that hard. I'm not really looking to get a ton of Gus Edwards shares. I'd rather go upside at that point in the draft anyway. So I have to be honest with you, man.
Speaking of post ACL players, he's not on the show sheet, but you mentioned him earlier in the podcast. Saquon Barkley did return last year post an ACL tear in 2020. But if we remember, like, our institutional memory in the fantasy world is so short. If we remember from just last year, he wasn't even supposed to start the first couple weeks. There were legitimate concerns that he was going to miss the first 4 weeks or so of the season. It ends up he doesn't miss almost any time from the ACL tear and rushed out there, looks really inefficient. Devontae Booker's splitting carries. They rush for the same amount of yards. But now Booker's gone. New offensive coordinator, new head coach, knew almost everything in New York. Edwin, is that a sign that there's a bounce back year for Saquon Barkley?
Here is what I'll tell you about Saquon Barkley. I wrote 2,000 words about his ACL recovery, gave all the reasons why I thought that his upside was worth it. He was going in like the back end of the first round. I told you for all the reasons that were in the scientific literature that he was going to come back and perform regardless of the ACL. He had 10 and a half weeks to come back. You can go back and dig through my Twitter tweets around the time that Rappaport was saying that he might not be back by week 1. I said, he's going to be back by week 1. He's going to have plenty of time. It's never a concern. Lo and behold, we had Saquon Barkley active week 1. Okay. So that's just stage 1, part 1 of the story. You skipped a few parts, my friend, so I'm going to fill in the blanks.
Please do.
That was the offseason. That was the preseason. Okay. Here is Saquon Barkley, weeks 1 through 4 snaps. Their snap percentage. 48%, 84%, 86%, 89%. Pretty good, huh?
Pretty much full snaps.
Gets better. Here's Saquon Barkley's targets weeks 1 through 4. 3, 6, 7. Not bad. We'll take it. Not bad. All right. Fantasy points weeks 1 through 4. Saquon Barkley. 3.7, 8.9. A little better.
But you were probably not starting Saquon week 1, though.
I was starting. Bradley, I was starting Saquon Barkley. 21.4.
That's pretty good.
29.6.
That's pretty good.
Finished RB. I think in that time period, I have to go back and double check. This isn't Graham Barfield stat pack at fantasypoints.com. I'm relatively certain during that time period on a points per game basis, he was like an RB10. He was like RB10 after 4 weeks. In week 1, he played 48% of snaps, Bradley.
Yep.
He played 48% of snaps. So I hope this illuminates that when the data leads us to finding outliers, they're standing right in mere sight. I didn't care about his offensive line. I didn't care that he was coming off an ACL because his peripherals, his athleticism, and all the scientific literature showed that it wouldn't really matter for him. His pass catching work said that it wouldn't matter for him. All those things led us to Saquon Barkley ending as the RB10 weeks 1 through 4. Then he literally, I don't know if you knew this, there are videos of it out there, literally didn't even have the ball, but he stepped on a defender's foot, rolled his ankle, and was out like the next 4 weeks.
Yep.
After that, yeah, numbers are bad. He took 60% of snap. You listed the rushing yards with him and Booker. Literally, there were times where Booker would come off the pile and you thought it was Saquon and vice versa. It was not pretty. Listen, I'm not here to tell you that it was the right overall outcome on Barkley, but the process was correct. He rolled his ankle, and it had absolutely nothing to do with the ACL. And he wasn't even on the report for the knee at that point after that. It was all ankle. So a running back in his prime, right? He's literally in his prime age. He catches passes. He has high draft capital. Do you know the only other running back in the last 15 years who has a better SPARQ score than Saquon Barkley? And it's by 1%. Do you know who? And by the way, athleticism matters in terms of coming back like after sport because you have the higher athletic reserve. Do you know who that is, Bradley?
Oh, tell me.
One running back. Adrian Peterson. Adrian freaking Peterson.
That makes sense to me.
Running back since in the last 15 years with better athleticism than Adrian Peterson, and it is 1%. So all of this is to say, like, I'm giving the exact same analysis on Saquon Barkley in 2022 that I gave preseason 2021 because none of it's changed. If anything, he's another year removed from the ACL, if that's what worried you. Brian Daboll's here to throw him the ball every freaking pass. And have you seen the pictures that Saquon's put? All right. You've been blessed for the last 5 minutes. That's my take on Saquon. You probably weren't expecting me to go off that way, but there it is.
Oh, I love it. That's great. No, I've very much come around on Saquon. I was worried for a bit there, but you and other guests have very much encouraged me to change my mind on Saquon Barkley. So well done, Edwin. Unfortunately, we're going to keep moving on. We've got a couple more wide receivers, running backs in this list, but Chris Godwin, there was early optimism this offseason that he would make it back for week 1, but recent reports, they've dashed those hopes. Not expected now to make it for week 1. I had never thought that he was going to make it back for week 1. He got injured, week 15, something like that. He's going as the wide receiver 29 right now on Underdog, 58th overall. He's looking to miss 4 more weeks, maybe more. Like, we don't know. It could be longer depending upon his recovery, but make it make sense to me. That's one that I'm concerned of. Why are we drafting Chris Godwin so high when we know he's going to miss a lot of time?
The soonest we're going to see Chris Godwin is October 3rd, 2022. Soonest. And we're already getting reports that the Bucs want to take it slow with him. I would tack on another month. You might not see Chris Godwin until the middle of November, in all reality. I wish there was more analysis in that, other than the fact if your guests or your audiences are wondering, where did I get that number? An ACL recovery, almost, let me back up. Almost always, a first-time ACL, almost always requires, the patient requires at least 9 months to be medically cleared by a physician in the rehab team, at least. Any reports that they're ahead of schedule or behind schedule before like month 8, I don't even listen to. Don't even bother. It's an optimistic or pessimistic beat reporter usually trying to put something out. Michael Gallup isn't ahead of schedule. He's right where he needs to be, probably. Chris Godwin was never ahead of schedule. Jamison Williams was never ahead of schedule. Until these guys get to month 8 and then month 9, we cannot project their timeline. They're going to be at least 9 months from the surgery date that we see them, because that's what the data points to. That's what medical evidence has shown us is the safest for these dudes and these female athletes. That is what we go with. Any date, any surgical date you have, tack on 9 months. That is the best case scenario you'll see. In some cases, tack on another 2 to 6 weeks.
Yeah, so there are, in the 2 big tournaments that I play in, the large field tournaments for drafters and also for Bestball Mania 3 and Underdog, both of them have season long. If you are the season winner, you get the prize. And I think Godwin is one of those players that is more of an avoid for those types of tournaments versus the Underdog Bestball Mania 3, where you can win $2 million during week 17. You have to get to the playoffs and everything. But even so, like the Chris Godwin teams, there probably aren't going to be very many Chris Godwin teams if you're drafting him that early. Okay.
I would say that. I would agree. Sorry, I was on mute.
No, we'll keep going. Adam Thielen, he'll be 32 when the season starts. He's missed 11 games over the last 3 years with hamstring and ankle injuries. He's more of the big-bodied wide receiver who gets hurt catching balls. We've also seen those types of players drop off after 30. Do you have concerns about Thielen's injury past or injury future based on what he's experienced, but also based on his athletic profile? He's going as wide receiver 35, ADP 71, end of the 6th round.
I'm going to push back a little bit. On you. What injuries has Adam Thielen?
Let me pull it up.
What injuries has Adam Thielen had? You tell me. I got a couple in mind that I remember.
Hamstring and ankle injuries are the ones that come to mind for me.
What did he have last year? I think last year was the high ankle, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think so. The ankle injuries
we see with him is he caught so many touchdowns in the Zimmer era, and he was injured once with the hamstring and once with an ankle. I'm not too concerned about those 2 specific injuries. Maybe some soft tissue like hamstring. Yeah, he might get a little bit of that again. But what I would say is I'm just not in on him for the overall picture. Scored a lot of touchdowns with a coach that's gone, is getting up there in age, has the hamstring history where he tried to come back in the first place and re-injured it. All of those things, he's 30, like you said, he's 32 years old. I really don't see the upside in him, or at least I see the upside being a little less predictable. We know that the last time we had a top, even 12 wide receiver who was over the age of 31, it might be sooner than I thought, or it might be more common than I thought, but I just don't see the upside. Like, I think he's in a very similar way that, like, for running backs, Cam Akers is like fine. I think Adam Thielen's fine. Do you disagree?
The reports out of Minnesota camp are that they're going to be even pass heavier. So if they're moving the ball down the field, he was already getting what was the target share last year? A ridiculous target share, just with 21% target share. But you mentioned that he was catching a lot of touchdowns, but only 22% red zone share. So this is a player that I think he's a lot cheaper than if you're concerned about the injuries, I think that's a reason to fade him. And if you're worried about him falling off the age cliff, I think that's a legitimate concern as well. But he also blossomed later. Like, he doesn't have as much tread on the tires as other players because undrafted free agent didn't really get started until later in his career.
Bradley. No such thing. Injury-free mileage is not a thing. Tread on the tires is not a thing. The more likely reason for a player to fall off is that aging process. Again, wide receivers can stay on top a little longer than running backs. Obviously, they don't have to be as explosive. I think that it's okay for us to disagree here. Because I can see what you're saying. But again, I think for me,
the pass rate for the Rams last year, their offensive coordinator, now O'Connell, their head coach, they were second in neutral game scripts versus the Vikings, which were below average. So I think
what I would say is he supplemented that with touchdown volume, which we know is very difficult to predict. And we said it was going to be hard to predict last year, and he did it anyway. So maybe he'll do it 3 years in a row, but maybe not. I don't really want to go chasing touchdowns. That's what I'm saying. That's my perspective. And when all the targets are going to Justin Jefferson and Irv Smith, what's going to be left?
Justin Jefferson is my wide receiver one.
No, at least you're consistent. I got it.
The Packers fan in me is worried about this Minnesota offense. We'll keep it going real quick here. Michael Thomas. What are we going to do with Michael Thomas? He should have been back already, right?
Yeah, so he definitely should have been back already. I'm definitely concerned, and I really don't know what's going on. That could honestly be the extent of the analysis, and I would tell you that I really don't understand what's going on. I don't understand where he's at in his rehab, and if we're still talking rehab 2 years later, something went awry. Worst case scenario, he could have arthritis in his ankle that we don't know about. The arthritis is the Todd Gurley disease. Best case scenario, he had a second surgery and had some hardware taken out, and he's just rehabbing again. We don't know is the bottom line. We just truly don't know. I get it. If you want to throw him on the end of your bench, you maybe get him in 8th, 9th round. I don't really know where you would be comfortable taking him, but there's no way to predict what's going to happen. There's no way to predict if he's even healthy, to be 100% honest with you.
I feel like he's the biggest boom bust candidate among all the wide receivers because he could be within that top 5 if he gets back to where he was, similar to what we saw from Antonio Brown. Even at age, he's just an elite talent. But you mentioned the injury history. He could have the arthritis. We could see the fall off just like Todd Gurley. And he's going as wide receiver 36 right now in the 7th round on Underdog. So I think that is very much baked into the concerns are baked in, but I'm not sure if it's the right value.
Exactly. That's what I would say too.
Okay, we'll keep going. Clyde Edwards-Helaire came off of gallbladder surgery that we didn't really know about. How do you think that impacted him? And should we have more confidence in a Clyde Edwards-Helaire bounce back season? He's going as running back 26 right now. His ADP is actually dropping right now, given the addition of Jerick McKinnon, surprisingly. So
I don't think the gallbladder situation is CEH's saving grace. I'll put it that way. I think it might account, I don't know, and this is also arbitrary. Maybe it accounts for 10 to 15% of some of the struggles that he saw early on. CEH kind of is what he is at this point, I think. The Chiefs have shown us how they're going to use him. The injury history is interesting. He's had 2 high ankles and an MCL. Not great. You don't love to see that. Again, a guy that I'm just lukewarm on for the overall picture. The gallbladder surgery is probably a piece of the puzzle, but probably a small piece of the puzzle.
I prefer drafting him when he was going in round 9 and round 10. Now he's up to round 7. I'll wait and see if there's more falling that happens with Clyde Edwards-Helaire. 10th on our list, Robert Woods. He's coming off an ACL as well, but he tore his ACL earlier than the other likes of Chris Godwin or Jameson Williams. We've seen him running and jumping, and that's what we wanted to see from other players like the aforementioned J.K. Dobbins. Is it realistic that Woods starts week 1? He's going in round 9 of underdog, ADP 105.
I think it's possible. I don't really know exactly where he is in his rehab. Sort of like I said earlier, every player needs at least 9 months to be completely healthy. His exact return date's gray, and I say this over at FantasyPoints.com at the Injury Insights, sort of the running injury tracker that we use. So the general date that I have for him is a projected September 1st because his surgery date is not reported. And so if his 9 months clearance is at September 1st, then obviously he has a chance to come back by week 1. I don't think he'll have his feet under him by then. I think it'll be a while. I think it'll be at least another 2 to 4 weeks before we really see what Robert Woods can do physically. So he's not a guy that I'm super excited to draft, especially given that offense.
They're going to be putrid this year
around it. Yes, but I think he can be fine. I just think that 30 years old, coming off the ACL in that offense, not quite 9 months by the time week 1 rolls around, or just barely 9 months. I'm just not excited. Again, not a guy that I'm going to fade per se, but just not a guy I'm super excited about.
Another wide receiver coming off a torn ACL, surgery in early February, probably starts the season on the pup, Michael Gallup. He's getting drafted in round 10, only a round after Robert Woods. That doesn't make sense to me. Like, why there's only a round difference between a player who's definitely going to have a chance to start the season and another player who has zero shot of starting the season.
Make it made sense to me, man. I don't know. Michael Gallup had surgery in about mid-February. Valentine's Day was that week was when he had surgery. We reverse engineer that, the 9 months. It's going to be at least November before we see Michael Gallup. And depending on the complications that he might have, depending on the severity of the injury itself, it might be even longer than that. Like, Michael Gallup is not a guy that I'm interested in drafting. And he shouldn't be going behind Robert Woods or in front of Robert Woods.
Yeah, his efficiency metrics even before the injury were down. So I agree with you there. Jameson Williams, rookie, tore his ACL in the national championship game. Surgery happened in early January. When could Williams return to play? What are the chances that he returns to form during the 2022 season? Because there's a difference between like starting the season and return to the ceiling that we had seen in college.
Exactly. And what I would say is his exact date at 9 months is going to be October 13th. And that would be the soonest we see him. So that's bare bones bottom line. We're not going to see him any sooner than October. Return to peak form for a rookie might end up being a wash. Not to say that he might not have some spike weeks for you towards the end of the season. Maybe you're a week 18, dumpster diver. I don't know, but
leave him on the waiver wire or stash him on the IR, right? Stash players.
I would say, yeah, there you go. I would say he's more of a waiver wire guy, honestly. There are other guys that I'd rather take a shot.
And not a best ball guy. I don't like almost the entire season could be a wash, and just don't take the 0. All right, last player here, Edwin. Appreciate you taking the time with me today. Last player, I'm more in on Jameis Winston than my consensus peers. He tore his ACL. Surgery was mid-November. Should he be ready for week 1? And are there limitations that we should expect Joe Burrow had last season coming off the ACL and all of the other catastrophic things that happened to Burrow's knee?
Not quite the same thing,
okay.
But that's a good thing for Jameis. His injury was ACL meniscus, relatively certain. Burrow's was like ACL, meniscus, capsule, like a bunch of stuff that was not great. And he was still able to come back right at 9 months or so. It was like 9 months and 10 days or something for Burrow. So, Winston had surgery the week of November 11th. He's projected to be back mid-August in full force, fully cleared by then, which gives him at least another month before the season starts. I think that he'll be back. He's not really a mobile guy to begin with, so I think he'll be ready to go, and he'll be able to ball out and eat those W's.
All right. Thanks, Evan. I appreciate it. It was great chatting with you about these players. You can follow Edwin on Twitter at FBInjuryDoc, and you can find his work at Fantasy Points. What other plugs do you have for us before you head out?
Yeah, just go to my Twitter and subscribe to my newsletter. Right now, it's only like a week, every 2 week update with sort of the big highlights. During the season, the vision for the newsletter itself is to give you instantaneous reaction to injuries, projections for injuries, timelines, data points, things to read and consider. We know that for injuries, you really just need the information as soon as you can get it, and you need it to be accurate. That's the goal of the newsletter. Sign up with your email, get the newsletter pumped out to you as soon as I get those things updated. Yeah, that's really the thing. Listen to my podcast, Injury Prone Podcast. That's all. I appreciate you having me on, Brad. Thanks for letting me push back a few times.
Oh, no, I love it. It makes me a better player. Iron sharpens iron. I'm a big believer in that. That'll do it for today's pod. Thanks to all of you for tuning in. If you haven't subscribed to the Best Ball Fantasy Podcast, make sure to do wherever you listen to your podcast. Make sure to check out the Best Ball YouTube channel and the new bestballfantasy.com, where I have all the things and much more coming. I'll be drafting live on the YouTube throughout the offseason. Make sure to check it out there. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at @FStalder. Thanks for listening. I appreciate it. In the meantime, good luck in Best Ball streets.